On the morning of December 8, 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor, a lieutenant general named Lesley McNair sat at his desk at Washington Barracks and looked at a number that he had been preparing for, in one way or another, for 20 years. The United States Army had 780,000 soldiers. It needed 8 million. McNair was 58 years old. Nearly deaf, a fact kept secret throughout the war. He read lips. He avoided large meetings where he could not follow the conversation. He worried his hearing would force him to retire. Marshall kept him on because he understood what the hearing loss obscured. This quiet, invisible general was the most important thinker the Army had about turning civilians into soldiers at industrial scale. He had been born in Verndale, Minnesota in 1883. Graduated 11th in his West Point class of 1904. Served in the Pancho Villa expedition and the First World War, where he became, at 35, the youngest brigadier general in the American Army. In the interwar years, while others competed for command, McNair spent his time in schools, studying military education, developing doctrine, thinking about how armies learn and whether learning could be systematized and accelerated. George Marshall called him the brains of the Army. He never commanded troops in combat. He communicated in memos. He was deliberately invisible. His decisions were structural: changes to training curricula, revisions to mobilization doctrine, adjustments to how the Army identified and promoted talent. Decisions no one noticed until years later, when the men produced by the system were fighting in Tunisia and Normandy and the Bulge, and someone asked where they had come from. They came from McNair. The problem was not scale, though the scale was staggering. It was time. Britain had spent years. Germany had been rearming since 1933. Japan had been at war in China since 1937. The United States had roughly 18 months before its forces would need to fight. McNair's task at Army Ground Forces was to expand from 780,000 to more than 8 million by 1945. All training, all schools, all mobilization camps, all officer candidate programs. The entire machinery by which a civilian became a soldier and a soldier became an officer. He had to build the machine while running it. This was the problem McNair had spent 20 years preparing to solve. British officers arrived to observe with the confidence of men representing the most experienced military tradition in the world. Fighting since 1939, some in uniform since the 1920s. They walked through Fort Benning and Camp Walters with professional attention that was not quite contempt, too professional for that, but unmistakably skeptical. What they saw worried them. Enthusiastic men, often physically impressive, larger, stronger than British equivalents on average. But they didn't know what they were doing yet. Drill imperfect, officers young and uncertain. The whole enterprise had the quality of a machine that had not found its rhythm, powerful in potential, erratic in performance. One British colonel watching a field exercise in summer 1942 wrote in his diary, "The Americans believe a soldier can be manufactured. I am not yet sure they are wrong." He was not wrong. McNair just needed time. And somewhere in Texas, in a cotton field outside Kingston in Hunt County, a 17-year-old boy named Audie Murphy was trying to figure out how to get in. The Marines had already said no. The Navy had said no. He was 5 feet 5 inches tall. He weighed 112 pounds. 5th grade dropout. Picked cotton to feed his mother and 11 siblings after his father abandoned the family. His mother had died in 1941. In every measurable way, exactly the kind of person the Sandhurst-trained British officers watching American camps would not have imagined as officer material. His sister forged a document saying he was a year older. The Army took him on June 30th, 1942. McNair's machine would do the rest. The first thing the Army did with Audie Murphy was give him a test. A written test. 150 questions measuring verbal reasoning, quantitative ability, spatial aptitude. The Army General Classification Test, developed by military psychologists in 1940 and 1941, administered to every man, regardless of background, schooling, or whether his name appeared in a society column or a sharecropper's ledger. The test produced a number. The number determined what happened next. 9 million American men took the AGCT during the war. Above 130, Officer Candidate School, or Advanced Technical Training. Between 100 and 130, Infantry, Artillery, Armor. Below 80, Limited options. Murphy scored well enough for the infantry. Not, at first glance, a triumph of the system. The infantry was where most men went, and where most died. But the AGCT had identified something his fifth-grade education and 112-pound frame did not advertise. Intelligence, spatial reasoning, the pattern recognition that infantry small unit leaders needed. He did not know this yet. He was 17, going to basic training at Camp Walters, Texas. The same flat Texas landscape he had spent his childhood picking cotton in, now organized into barracks rows, firing ranges, and obstacle courses. Basic training in McNair's system was 13 weeks. British officers who learned this figure often stopped and asked for clarification. 13 weeks was what a British soldier received in the first few months of basic training, after which he was considered not yet ready for deployment. McNair's 13 weeks were denser, structured around what he called realistic training. Live ammunition, stress positions, simulated combat conditions designed to create the physiological and psychological responses of actual combat before men ever faced it. McNair had a theory about fear. Soldiers who had never experienced combat stress would spend part of their first engagement being managed by their fear rather than fighting. The solution? Pre-expose men to sufficient stress that the first real engagement was not also the first time they had felt what combat felt like. British officers noted this with professional unease. Training casualty rates were higher than British equivalents. McNair considered it acceptable. Dead in training was terrible. Dead in combat because you froze on first contact was worse, and more likely. Murphy went through the 13 weeks. Not an obvious leader. Small, young, quiet and watchful, slightly separate from the unit's social current. Grown up in a family where resources were scarce and attention thin across 12 children. Self-sufficient in a way that made him easy to overlook. But he could shoot. A friend back in Texas had noted this with the specific observation that Murphy was a good shot because if he wasn't, his family didn't eat that night. Not an exaggeration. Murphy had been hunting for food since he was old enough to hold a rifle. He understood ballistics and breath control and patience not as classroom subjects, but as survival skills acquired under conditions that made the learning stick. The Army's marksmanship program identified him. The Army's Small Unit Leadership Program, which put NCOs in simulated combat situations and watched how they responded to stress, found him again. McNair's machine was doing what McNair designed it to do, finding the people who were already capable and giving them the conditions under which that capability became visible. Murphy shipped out to North Africa in 1943. He was 18 years old. He had been in the Army for a year. The system had found him. Now the war would find out what that meant. On February 19, 1943, at a place called Kasserine Pass in Tunisia, the United States Army met the German Afrika Korps in open battle for the first time. It went badly. Very badly. American 2nd Corps routed across 30 miles of desert in 2 days. 6,500 men captured or killed. 180 tanks destroyed. Hundreds of artillery pieces abandoned. The Corps ceased to function as a unit. British officers did not gloat, too professional for that. But in private letters and dispatches, some wrote versions of what they had been thinking all along. That 13 weeks was not enough. That manufactured soldiers were not real soldiers. That the American training machine had produced the appearance of an army. Field Marshal Harold Alexander sent a blunt assessment to London. American junior officers did not meet the standard of their British counterparts. American soldiers needed more time. He was right about the problem. he was wrong about the solution. Here is what the British assessment missed. Within days, American officers were writing after-action reports with a specificity unusual in any army. Not reports that distributed blame diplomatically or protected senior reputations. Reports that said, "This is what failed. This is why. This is what changes." The command post 70 miles from the front. The coordination failures between armor and infantry. Artillery not pre-registered on the German approaches. Every failure documented, analyzed, routed to McNair's apparatus at Army ground forces. And the apparatus changed. Major General Lloyd Friedendahl was removed from command on March 6, 1943. His replacement was George Patton. Not because Patton was available, because the after-action review had produced a specific analysis of what kind of leadership was needed, and the Army acted on that analysis in 17 days. Patton had 17 days before the Germans attacked again. March 23, 1943. El Guitar. The 10th Panzer Division, same formation that contributed to Kasserine, committed 50 of 57 available tanks in a dawn assault. It expected the same Americans from 6 weeks before. It found a kill zone. Patton had placed tank destroyers in concealed positions. Artillery pre-registered on every German approach. Americans fired first, from positions the Germans never identified. When the engagement ended, the 10th Panzer had lost more than 30 tanks. The first time American forces had defeated an experienced German armored formation in open battle. 6 weeks. From Kasserine to El Guitar, in 6 weeks. Rommel noted it in his private papers. American commanders had absorbed the lessons of mobile warfare with remarkable speed. Not a compliment, an observation. The way a professional notes something that has shifted in his opponent. McNair read the after-action reports from Washington. No record of his reaction exists. He was not a man who left reactions in the record. What the reports confirmed, his system was working. Not by producing perfect soldiers on first contact, but by producing an institutional reflex that treated failure as information rather than something to hide. The reflex was working. But something else was becoming apparent. The training system had produced soldiers who, given the right conditions and leadership, could fight. What it had not yet fully produced, what Kasserine exposed, was enough officers who could lead under the specific chaos of combined arms combat against a first-rate enemy. McNair had a solution for that too. He had been building it since 1942. It was called Officer Candidate School. And the British were about to have something complicated to say about it. In the spring of 1942, a 22-year-old sales clerk from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, named Richard Winters, walked into an officer candidate school at Camp Toccoa, Georgia, and began what the British Army would have considered an impossible process. He was going to become a commissioned officer in 90 days. The British called OCS graduates 90-day wonders, not affectionate. The implied question: what can a man learn about leading others in combat in 90 days? What does he know about the nature of command, the unpredictability of men under fire, that experience hasn't yet revealed? The answer, in 1942, was not enough. The early OCS graduates were often exactly what the British feared: theory without truth, authority that was formal rather than earned. Correct orders in training, wrong ones in combat. Not from stupidity, but because the distance between knowing how and knowing when had not yet been closed by experience. And yet, McNair defended the system with specificity that showed he was not defending it blindly. His argument was mathematical before philosophical. The Army needed 800,000 commissioned officers. West Point graduated 400 per year. Neither pipeline, combined, could fill that requirement for a war fought across 4 continents. A war requiring that officers fall and be replaced at rates professional military education was structurally incapable of sustaining. The Army needed officers the way it needed tanks. In numbers, the existing process could not produce. OCS was the answer. 13 weeks. Entrance examination drawing from AGCT scores and unit commander recommendations. The essentials of military leadership compressed into the minimum time the Army had calculated necessary, delivered to men already selected for the required aptitudes. 1 in 3 did not make it through. This was designed. McNair believed the selection process, the attrition, the stress, the relentless evaluation, was itself a meaningful filter. Men who completed OCS had demonstrated something about their capacity to function under pressure. The 90 days were not producing officers so much as identifying them. By the end of the war, OCS had commissioned more than 800,000 officers. Richard Winters was one of them. 2nd Lieutenant, Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry, 101st Airborne. He jumped into Normandy on the night of June 5, 1944, separated from his unit in the darkness, assembled a scratch force, and on the morning of June 6th, led an assault on 4 German 105mm guns at Brecourt Manor, guns firing onto the Utah Beach landing zone. Winters had 12 men against approximately 50 German defenders in prepared positions. He assigned specific tasks, established a base of fire, moved the assault element under cover, and took the position. The assault was later taught at West Point as a model of small unit tactics. Commissioned 18 months before the battle, led Easy Company for less than a year. A Lancaster County man, Eagle Scout, runner, the disciplined ordinariness of an American small town. McNair's machine had found him. The system hadn't built what Winters did at Brecourt Manor. It had put him in a position to do it, given him tools and authority, and trusted that a man with those qualities would use them correctly. Back in Washington, McNair was not thinking about Winters or Brecourt Manor. He was thinking about replacement pipelines, training schedules, the 15 divisions that needed to be at full strength by August. He was nearly deaf. He communicated in memos. He was the most important person in the Army that almost no one had heard of. And 6 weeks after D-Day, he was going to be dead. On January 26, 1945, near the village of Holtzver in northeastern France, 2nd Lieutenant Audie Murphy commanded Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, in a position that was about to be attacked by a German force of 6 tanks and approximately 250 infantry. He was 19 years old. 2.5 years in the Army, Tunisia, Sicily, Italy, southern France, now Alsace, 9 campaigns. Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Bronze Star, 3 Purple Hearts. Battlefield Commission initially refused because he didn't want to leave the men he had been fighting alongside. He accepted the commission eventually. The men who had watched him fight for 2 years called him Sir and meant it. The German counterattack came in the early afternoon. 6 panzers and infantry moving through open fields. Murphy's company was under strength from casualties. Armor support? 2 M10 tank destroyers, lighter than the panzers. One immediately slid into a ditch and was abandoned. Murphy ordered his men to withdraw to the tree line. He did not go with them. His Medal of Honor citation says, "He remained forward at his command post and continued to give fire directions to the artillery by telephone." Accurate, incomplete. What it doesn't capture, when the 2nd M10 took a direct hit and began to burn, and its crew ran for the tree line, Murphy looked at the burning vehicle. .50 caliber machine gun mounted on top, ammunition presumably intact, and climbed onto it. A burning tank destroyer. 50 yards from the nearest German infantry. 6 panzer tanks in the area. The vehicle he was standing on potentially about to explode. He used the machine gun. For approximately 1 hour, artillery fire directions by telephone in one hand, machine gun in the other. Germans within 50 yards. Flanking movement, he pivoted. Infantry from the front, he pivoted back. He killed an estimated 50 German soldiers during the engagement. When asked after the war why he had climbed onto the burning tank destroyer, Murphy gave the answer quoted in every account since: "They were killing my friends." Not tactical calculation, not heroic self-conception, not the abstract patriotism of a recruiting poster. They were killing his friends, and he had a machine gun, and the arithmetic was simple. Murphy's response to the commendation in a letter home: "Since that is all the medals they have to offer, I'll have to take it easy for a while." 19 years old, started as a private, 13 weeks of basic training, AGCT score, replacement pipeline, small unit leadership evaluations. All the machinery the British had watched in 1942 with skepticism. The system had not made him capable of what he did at Holzver. No system could manufacture that. But the system had found him in a Texas cotton field and put him in the position where that capability could matter. Remember the British colonel who wrote in his diary in 1942, "The Americans believe a soldier can be manufactured. I am not yet sure they are wrong." By January 1945, he had his answer. Not manufactured, found. The system found Murphy in a Texas cotton field, gave him 13 weeks and a test score and conditions under which what he already was could become visible, and sent him to Tunisia and Sicily and Italy and France and Alsace, and put him in front of 6 panzers and 250 German infantry. He figured it out. The system hadn't built him. The system had found him. On July 25, 1944, 6 months before Holzver, Lieutenant General Lesley McNair was in a foxhole near Saint-Lô, France, doing what he had always done. He was observing. He had been wounded in Tunisia the previous year, shrapnel while observing. Too close for a 3-star general. His staff said so. His superiors said so. McNair went anyway, because you could not understand training without understanding combat, and you could not understand combat without getting close enough that it could kill you. In Tunisia, it had nearly killed him. In France, it did. Operation Cobra: 1,500 heavy bombers, 380 mediums, 550 fighter bombers, 4,000 tons of explosives. Red smoke signals marking German lines blew the wrong direction. 77 aircraft dropped short. The ground, in Bradley's words, belched, shook, and spewed dirt to the sky. Bodies flung from slit trenches. A bomb landed squarely on McNair and threw his body 60 feet. They identified him by the 3 stars on his collar. Funeral kept secret. McNair had been assigned to command a fictional army group to convince the Germans that Normandy was a diversion. 6 generals attended. No band. No shots in salute. Death initially reported as enemy action to protect the deception. His son, Colonel Douglas McNair, was killed by a Japanese sniper on Guam 12 days later. Posthumous 4th star in 1954. Gravestone not updated until 2010. The American Battle Monuments Commission had been unaware of the promotion for 66 years. He never commanded troops in combat. He communicated in memos. He was nearly deaf. He did not write a memoir or appear on magazine covers. The men who fought the battles he made possible did not know his name. Here is what he made possible: 780,000 to 8 million soldiers, 9 million men through the AGCT, 800,000 officers commissioned in 13-week cycles. Every defeat converted into data that changed the next battle. The German generals interrogated after the war surprised their questioners. Not that Americans were the best soldiers they had faced. The Wehrmacht respected the British for steadiness, the Russians for endurance. What the Germans said about Americans was different. They said the Americans learned too fast. Whatever Americans did wrong on Tuesday, fixed by the following Tuesday. The tactical situation that produced a German success in the morning was gone by afternoon. The American unit reorganized, came back with a different approach addressing the specific failure of the previous attempt. Guderian told his interrogators that Patton had conducted a good campaign, the kind of compliment one professional gives another. From a man whose contempt for amateurism was well documented, it was significant. He was not complimenting Patton alone. He was complimenting a system that had produced, in 3 years, an army capable of a campaign Guderian recognized as sound. McNair built that system. Quietly. In memos. Going deaf. His gravestone at Normandy shows 4 stars now. Most visitors walk past without recognizing the name. But the system he built found Audie Murphy in a Texas cotton field, and Richard Winters in Lancaster County, and 8 million others in farms and factories and offices across a continent-sized country. It gave them 13 weeks and a test score, and the conditions under which what they already were could become visible. And then it trusted that they would figure out what to do. They figured it out. McNair never saw it. He died in July 1944, 6 months before Murphy climbed onto the burning tank. The machine kept running without him, absorbing defeats and converting them into corrections, finding the men that Britain's regimental system had no mechanism to find, and Germany's professional army had no answer for. The system hadn't built them. The system had found them. That was the whole argument. It was true. In the summer of 1945, a German general named Hans von Lück sat in a prisoner of war camp in England and thought about what had gone wrong. 33 years old. Commanded a panzer regiment in Normandy from D-Day until the German lines collapsed in August 1944. Professional soldier from a military family, trained in the Wehrmacht Officer Corps, one of the finest military educational systems in history, producing officers who understood tactical doctrine, combined arms warfare, and armored operations at a level no other army in the world matched in 1940 or 1941. By 1944, something had changed. In Normandy, he had noticed. American junior officers were not what he expected from an army at war for only 2.5 years. They adapted quickly. When a tactic failed, they changed it. When a position became untenable, they found another approach without waiting for orders. They showed initiative at the small unit level that the German officer corps, trained in precision and obedience, sometimes lacked. He did not understand where it came from. The German system took years. Kriegsschule, unit service, specialized schools. 3 to 4 years from commissioning to competent junior officer. It produced men who could read terrain, execute complex maneuvers, coordinate armor and infantry and artillery with the precision that made German tactical performance the benchmark for the entire war. How had the Americans produced something comparable in 90 days? The answer, reconstructed from fighting Americans, not from knowledge of the system itself, was that America had not tried to replicate the German method. They built something different. The German system produced officers by depth, the long accumulation of knowledge and institutional culture that turned a capable young man into a German officer over years of deliberate formation. It was excellent for peacetime and for a war that went the way Germany planned. McNair's system produced officers by selection. The AGCT found men with the cognitive aptitudes for small unit leadership. OCS gave them the minimum knowledge to exercise those aptitudes. Training pre-exposed them to combat stress. Then it put them in combat and watched what happened. What happened was Richard Winters at Brecourt Manor, Audie Murphy on a burning tank destroyer, 1,000 other engagements discussed in German prison camps, with the specific attention that mixes professional admiration and bewilderment. The bewilderment was the interesting part. The German generals understood quality through depth and time. That was their own system. What they could not account for was quality through selection and speed. Taking a Pennsylvania sales clerk or Texas cotton picker and, in a year or two, putting them where their innate capabilities could matter decisively. The German system assumed officer quality was produced by the process. McNair's assumed it was revealed by the process. Both were partially correct. The German process genuinely created qualities, steadiness, precision, operational sophistication that raw aptitude alone could not achieve. McNair's process genuinely revealed qualities already present: initiative, adaptability, the willingness to act without orders. The war had answered that question. In 1940, the German system was better. The Wehrmacht officer corps had produced the finest operational military force in the world. It won battles against larger, better-equipped opponents in France, the Soviet Union in 1941, North Africa. Everywhere, matched against armies that had not built their officer corps the same way. By 1944, something had shifted. 3 years of war, 90-day officers, 13 weeks of realistic training, 2 years of after-action reviews converting failure into knowledge at a rate the German system, designed for a short, victorious war, had not been built to sustain. By Normandy, by the Bulge, by the Rhine, the Americans were learning faster than the Germans could adapt. McNair had been right. The soldier could be found. In 1948, 3 years after the war ended, Audie Murphy published a memoir called To Hell and Back. Bestseller. Made into a film in 1955 with Murphy playing himself, a decision the studio resisted because they did not believe audiences would accept that the quiet, slightly built young man was the person who had done what the book described. Murphy convinced them. The film became Universal Studios' highest-grossing picture, a record held until Jaws in 1975. Murphy did not enjoy the fame. What was called battle fatigue then is called PTSD now. Loaded pistol under his pillow, dependence on sleeping pills, lost money on business ventures. In his last years, plagued by debt, he refused alcohol and cigarette commercials. He did not want to set a bad example. He often redirected questions about Holzwehr. The Medal of Honor was as much for the men he fought with as for himself. There were soldiers who deserved recognition more, who never received it. They were killing my friends. He died in a plane crash in Virginia on May 28, 1971. He was 45 years old. Buried at Arlington. His grave receives the second highest number of visitors of any grave there, second only to John F. Kennedy's. Lesley McNair is buried at Normandy, the highest-ranking American officer in that cemetery. Most visitors walk past without recognizing the name. McNair built the machine. Murphy was what the machine found. One of them is famous, movie star, household name, most decorated American combat soldier in history, grave drawing hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. The other is nearly forgotten. Footnote in military histories, name on a fort in Washington, subject of a single academic biography whose title accurately describes him. Unsung architect of the U.S. Army. This is not unusual. The people who build systems are rarely as famous as the people the systems produce. Edison is more famous than the engineers who built his factories. Ford's name is on the cars. The men who designed the assembly line are not remembered. But the assembly line is why the cars exist. McNair's assembly line, the AGCT, the OCS program, 13 weeks of realistic training, the after-action review system that converted Kasserine into El Guitar in 6 weeks. The institutional reflex that treated failure as information rather than something to explain diplomatically. The British had watched it in 1942 with skepticism. The Germans had fought against it with bewilderment. Alexander, who had written in 1943 that American junior officers did not meet his standard, wrote after the war that American forces at full stride were among the finest he had commanded. Guderian complimented Patton. Rommel noted the speed of American institutional learning. Von Luck spent his prison camp summer trying to understand how 90 days had produced what 4 years had not. They were all recognizing the same thing. McNair's bet had paid off. The proposition he had spent 20 years developing, that America contained men like Murphy, and that the right system at sufficient scale could find them and put them where their capabilities could matter, tested against the most demanding possible reality. Not failed. The British colonel who wrote "The Americans Believe a Soldier Can Be Manufactured" had framed the question wrong. McNair did not believe that. He believed a soldier could be found, that in the enormous, diverse, informal, class-free chaos of American civilian life, there were men who already had what it took, and that the right system could identify them and give them the conditions under which what they already were could become what the country needed. The system found them. In cotton fields and sales offices, in Hunt County, Texas, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in 9 million men who took a written test, in 800,000 who commissioned in 90 days, in the officers who wrote the after-action reports that turned Kasserine into El Guitar in 6 weeks. McNair built the machine. Murphy was what the machine found. The system hadn't built them. The system had found them. Remember Lesley McNair in the spring of 1942? 59 years old, nearly death, sitting at a desk at Washington Barracks with a number, 780,000, and a requirement, 8 million, and a timeline that no military in history had ever attempted to meet. No speeches, no newspapers, memos, curricula. The test that would assess 9 million men. 13 weeks of realistic stress. The after-action review system that would convert every defeat into institutional knowledge before the next battle. He was building a machine. He worried about his hearing. Read lips in meetings. Went to Tunisia to observe. Took shrapnel in the arm. Went back the following year to Normandy. Took a bomb in a foxhole and died. His funeral had 6 people. His papers were destroyed by his wife in her grief. His gravestone was not updated for 66 years. Now remember Audie Murphy in the summer of 1942. 17 years old, 112 pounds, 5th grade dropout, rejected by the Marines, the Navy, the paratroopers. His sister forged a document. The Army took him. The AGCT gave him a number. The number sent him to the infantry. 13 weeks at Camp Walters, then North Africa, then Sicily, then Italy, then southern France, then Alsace. On January 26, 1945, he climbed onto a burning tank destroyer and held off 250 Germans for an hour. They were killing his friends. These 2 men never met. McNair was killed in July 1944, 6 months before Holtzwihr. Murphy was a staff sergeant in France when McNair died, one of 8 million. One man among a number so large the system's architect could not have known his name. But the connection between them is the story. McNair built the machine that found Murphy. Murphy was what the machine was designed to find. Human capability distributed across a continent in quantities that no European military tradition had been built to locate or deploy. The initiative that flourishes where authority doesn't have to be waited for. The adaptability of a country where class doesn't fix the ceiling. The willingness to act. The reflex of a man who spent his childhood making decisions that, if wrong, meant his family didn't eat. That expressed itself, under extreme conditions, as climbing onto a burning tank. McNair's insight, not credited by the British in 1942, not countered by the Germans by 1944, was that this capability was not rare. Common. Distributed across the American population in numbers sufficient to staff an army of 8 million, if the system for finding it was efficient enough and honest enough about its failures to keep improving. The system worked, not perfectly, not without failures, but consistently enough, at sufficient scale to produce by 1944 an army that Guderian respected, and Rommel noted, and Alexander revised his assessment of. Here is the question this story leaves open. The conditions that made McNair's bet work, were they permanent? Or features of a particular moment, a particular generation, that existed in 1942 and may or may not exist today? Murphy hunted for food because if he didn't, his family didn't eat. The specific self-sufficiency of a childhood where no one else is going to solve your problems. The system found that. In 9 million men across a continent, farms, factories, small-town classrooms, big city tenements, a generation shaped by the Depression and the specific demands of American life. Whether the system would find the same thing today is a question military historians continue to debate. What is not debatable is what it found in 1942. It found Murphy. It found Winters. It found 800,000 officers in 90 days. It converted Kasserine into El Guitar in 6 weeks. McNair built the machine. The machine found the men. The men won the war. The architect never saw it. Died in a foxhole in France, identified by 3 stars on his collar, buried quietly while the deception he had been supporting continued. The system kept running without him. It was designed to. In 1949, a British general named Sir Brian Horrocks published a memoir of his wartime service. Horrocks had commanded British armored forces in North Africa and Northwest Europe. Not a man given to easy praise, he had seen what early American forces looked like in 1943. By 1944, he wrote, American commanders below the divisional level had developed a quality he found difficult to describe. He used the word instinct, a tactical instinct that manifested as the ability to read a situation and respond without waiting for authorization from above. He was not sure any training system could produce it. He was not sure where it came from. It came from McNair. Or rather, it came from the proposition McNair had spent 20 years trying to make actionable, that the American population contained men who already had this instinct, and that the right system could find them and put them in positions where it could matter. The British system produced soldiers by formation, shaping men over years into what a British soldier was supposed to be. Regiment's history, officer classes bearing, centuries of institutional culture. The formation was real, the soldiers capable, but calibrated to a specific kind of soldier that centuries of tradition had decided worked. McNair's system produced soldiers by revelation. Test, 13 weeks, after-action reviews treating failure as information rather than embarrassment. What emerged was sometimes nothing useful. What emerged, often enough to matter, was Winters and Murphy and 1,000 others who had been coal miners or sales clerks or sharecroppers' sons, who became, under the conditions McNair's system created, exactly the soldiers the war required. Not the soldiers tradition said should exist, the soldiers the war needed. This is what the British colonel in 1942 had not fully seen. He was right that they weren't manufacturing soldiers, wrong about what they were doing instead. Not manufacturing, prospecting. Running a system designed to find what was already there, in quantities sufficient to win a world war, distributed across 130 million people who had never been asked to produce this kind of soldier before, and who, when asked, produced it in such abundance that German generals in 1945 could not explain where it had come from. From the test score that sent Murphy to the infantry and Winters to the paratroopers. From the 13 weeks. From the after-action reviews that converted every failure into a correction. From McNair at his desk in Washington, nearly deaf, writing memos. From Murphy in a Texas cotton field, learning to shoot because if he didn't, his family didn't eat. From the distance between those two things, and the specific American proposition that the distance didn't matter, that what a man was born into did not determine what he could become, that the right system, honestly applied at sufficient scale, could find the men that tradition would have overlooked. McNair built the system. Murphy proved it. Germany couldn't explain it. Britain eventually acknowledged it. The system hadn't built them, the system had found them. And in the finding, looking for talent where tradition said it wasn't supposed to exist, was the thing no other military had been built to do at that scale. McNair never met Murphy, never knew his name, died in France 6 months before Holzver, identified by 3 stars on his collar. But what he built, in memos, curricula, test scores, 13-week training cycles, that is what put Murphy on the burning tank. The system hadn't built him, the system had found him. And the finding, looking for capability in places tradition said it wasn't supposed to exist, building a machine large enough and fast enough and honest enough to find it at scale, was what won the war. McNair built the machine. Murphy was what the machine found.